I'd like to introduce Ryan Hayward. He's the founder of Storytail and Heywahdee Ventures, also a framer guru. I've been following Ryan on socials for a few years now, and sort of thought I'd invite Ryan out to share his story. So welcome, Ryan. Cool. Take it away.
Thanks very much. Hey guys. When Chan messaged me a couple of weeks ago, I honestly wasn't too sure what I was going to talk about. But that same night, I was talking to my co-founder Tom on Discord, and we were doing some little product stuff, and we were tweaking the pixels and doing some motion and some interactions. And my partner said to me afterwards, she's like, "No one's going to care about this stuff." And I'm like, well, I reckon they will. And it was at that point I realized what I was going to talk about, which is the 2% that I think is the thing that makes us good to great. So I thought I'd share a little bit of my journey and some lessons that I think are the 2% most valuable along the way. So as you might be able to tell, I'm quite young. I'm actually only 22, but I've been freelancing since the age of 14. So in 2015, I discovered this site called 99 Designs, which actually has an office down the road, and started entering design contests. And as you can see from if you look very closely at the picture here, I entered 130 and only won 8 of them. So, 96% of the time I was working for free. But, there's a lot of learnings that you can take along with that. And the first thing that I learned along with this, and you can just see some of the designs and freelance work that I've done over the years, basically anything from like web design, graphic design, branding, UI, UX, animation, almost like anything we can claim to do as a designer. I've probably done it for our clients at some point. But the number one lesson, which I think is like one of the biggest ones here that I learned very, very early on, is that knowing how to design and being a designer are two completely different things. And I think like recently I've hired like 2 designers this year straight out of uni. Number one thing that I've seen from them and where I think like the design education's failing us a little bit is that they're teaching us how to design. So, how do we deal with typography? How do we deal with color, layout, motion, all these things? But then there's like being a designer, right? Which is like, how do we communicate with clients? How do we sell ourselves? How do we present ourselves? So I realized very quickly that, there's actually like this business side to actually being a designer that I actually found way more interesting than the actual design itself. So moving forward a couple of years, going through school, hit 17 years old, I'm in year 11, I'm like doing a lot of freelance work. I'm like, okay, what's next? And at the time I was doing a lot of branding projects. So I was constantly presenting logo designs and brand work to clients. I'm like, hey, there's got to be a better way of doing this than just like a PDF. So, naturally for me, the next step is to start some sort of company behind that, which is my first kind of real venture. I'll point out, like when I was freelancing at a young age, I didn't know what the word entrepreneur or really business even meant. And I kind of just like manually fell into that. But we started something called Pitchproof, which was myself and a co-founder who was a developer at the time, to kind of build these logo presentations in a really interactive way. And at the same time of doing that, we started creating a lot of content on Instagram. And this was right at the stage when, I'm sure you guys have seen some of this, like design education and those carousels on Instagram were like really popping off. And we were one of the first sort of, brands or creators or influencers in the space to actually start posting this design education. And very, very quickly over 2019 and, trying to do year 12, I grew this massive audience of like 90,000 designers online. We actually held the first online design conference back in 2019, pre-pandemic. And there was just like this instant just love for building community and content, specifically in the design space, that like I fell in love with. So we kind of like took a back step on the software product and actually put more energy into the content. And the number big lesson here that I learned is the best way to sell is not to sell. I think as like designers, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's ego. I don't know if it's self-doubt or what. But I think we always try to over-exaggerate our skill sets. We go like, I'm the best designer. I can do this for really cheap. And we try to sell a client or sell someone we're talking to. And the best way to do that is to actually not sell at all. And what I learned here in this kind of phase in my journey is the best way is to not to sell. So how do we ask questions? How do we give as much value as possible? And by doing that, we actually build this extra level of trust that in return, we're actually selling in a way that's not salesy and feels super authentic. So yeah, that was 2020. So just finished high school in 2019, graduated with a pretty shitty ATAR, not gonna lie, and then went straight out of school and got a full-time job at a place called Blackmagic Design in Port Melbourne, which do like the big fancy like video cameras for all the Hollywood films, and even like they've got some video editing software that's pretty popular as well. Yeah, DaVinci Resolve is their software, and then they've got hardware, which is like all the big fancy tech products that they do. They do some work with like Apple and some of their hardware too. So I was working as a web designer for their team for about 4 months, and as you can see, that was 2020. And then this mate came on screen almost every single day, and essentially I was like freelancing for them at the time, and they decided, no more freelancers, you got to get rid of them. So coming around April, May, I started to essentially not have that work, and fortunately enough, I was able to go freelance and basically full-time for myself ever since. But, you know, I think the big lesson here that I took away was you always need to milk 2 cows, right? You can't just milk one, because if that cow dies or, you know, goes away or off to the market. I'm from South Gippsland, by the way. I should probably preference that. Like, there's a lot of dairy farmers down there. But if you, one cow's go, you need another one to sustain yourself. So I definitely think, especially in this day and age, you need to milk 2 cows. So this is an example of one of the conferences that we ran online. So we ran one in 2019, we ran one in 2020, and another one in 2021. 2021 was like by far the biggest one that we did. You know, we had some really cool people like Christo and Mark Jander and all these really big players in the design space. And it was like a 5-day event. We hired people for it. We got a really cool venue. We had the fancy cameras, fancy production, and all that sort of stuff. Because we were doing pitch proof for a number of years, and we just had this, you know, massive audience and massive following, and we're just like, hey, how do we create all this value? And we just fell in love with this idea of like creating these experiences and virtual events that people could actually engage with. And, you know, we had people like from overseas in every corner of the world watching these events. We had like entire universities like set up their lecture rooms, and on the projectors they had like our live stream going, and you can see just like all the social buzz that was generated. Like, it was just insane. So the lesson here for me was around how do we become a experienced creator? And like, I think, you know, Up's a great example of this, of like, how do we create these experiences in our products and in our designs? And how do we get people to actually feel something? Because I think over time, what technology has happened and what's happened is, you know, we've kind of taken the humanity out of design. Like, everything's trying to like be streamlined, or how do we make things as quick and easy as to do as possible? But, you know, we almost need that generation Clippy back. And I think if we can figure out how we can add experience to what we're building, we can actually create much more impact. Which kind of leads us to the recent years. So what I did in 2022, was I started a company called Storytail, which the goal of Storytail was to essentially productize everything we did in the virtual event space and turn it into some sort of software. So the first step of that was like, hey, let's build the dream team. So I got my co-founder Tom, who was also the co-founder of Pitchproof, and I got Nick and Dale on board too, which were, you know, 2 mates that we kind of met at a co-working space, and we decided to team up and build something really cool. So the concept of Storytail was, how do we take virtual events? How do we take all that knowledge of experience and experience building, and how do we apply that to product? So we kind of, you know, had a bunch of taglines. It was around like, you know, what is Zoom fatigue? What is goodbye screen sharing? How do we eliminate all this need for like the frustration of video calls? And kind of, it's gone through a bunch of different pivots. Where we kind of are now is in this space of, you know, presenting and, you know, let's say instead of looking like every other Zoom call or every other Google Meet, you actually have this experience that you can host with your clients or presentations. So yeah, I mean, like, we're still building. There's still a lot of things that we're going through. And you can see, like, we get to do some cool stuff. This guy on the left-hand side is a guy named Alex, who's the creative director at Typeform. He's at my house. He's a good friend. And yeah, I just think, you know, there's a lot of cool lessons when you build a startup. The number one for us was around becoming a really great storyteller. You know, we did some pitching. We tried to raise some money. We tried to put the name out there as much as possible. And the number one thing that we learned is, you need to tell a good story. So whether you're presenting to a client, whether you're trying to sell your startup, knowing how to tell a great story and knowing how to get the word out there and get people captivated by what you do is just incredibly important. And we're really lucky because we've got a great guy called Nick Parker on our team who's a fantastic storyteller who has been, really great. And then that takes us to this year, which, there's obviously a lot of things that have happened, but who's here has heard of Framer before? Anyone? Yeah? Who knows it as a prototyping tool? Who knows it as a web design tool? Cool, so about 50-50. So yeah, if you don't know Framer essentially started out as a prototyping tool. It's like, hey, if you can design something in Figma, why can't you prototype it and make it come to life in Framer? Obviously, Figma came along. They were like, hey, we'll do prototyping too. And I think that kind of prompted Framer a couple of years ago to, switch the legs a little bit, and they kind of pivoted into web design, which is like their product now, which essentially is a major Webflow competitor. So about May this year, I came across Framer. Obviously had heard of it, like a lot of you. And I'm like, hey, let's go and try to build something. So I came from Webflow, so I found that experience relatively native to come across. And in May, I literally built a landing page in a day and I threw it up on Twitter. And I was like, hey, I might be able to sell this, but guess what? I'm just going to give it away for free. I'm just going to create as much value as possible. And I literally sold without selling. And then the next day, there was like 300 comments on this saying like, hey, I want this template. So I created this like mailing list, and then the next day I created another template and another template and another template. And we got to the stage where, so many people were asking me like, hey, teach me Framer, teach me Framer. So about a month later, we actually released a course. And in that first week, we had like 50 students sign up. Now there's like 600 students or something on there today. We've done some partnerships and built some other products around Framer. But, essentially what happened was this just like crazy growth story of like all these, Framer creators coming together and, just wanting to learn this new and exciting tool because they saw it as this tool of the future. And like now Framer is one of my biggest clients. We do like all their education stuff. They've got this massive template library that my team manages. So like we do a lot of work with Framer, and like I think like this is a great reason why I was invited here today, because like I think Framer is a really awesome tool, and I'm not gonna sell you on Framer, don't worry. But like if you do want to check it out, I've got a course and whatever. But like just the ability for someone to actually take the design in Figma and actually turn that into a reality as an actual website or as an actual product without code is mighty powerful. And yeah, it's been like honestly a bit of a crazy growth story this year. We've scaled a team around that. I run a couple of different businesses. One of the Framer stuff is called Insert Frame. We've got Storytail, and everything's kind of wrapped together with like Heywahdee Ventures, which is the other name that you said there. And you can see like we're always growing, which has been super cool to see. So the big lesson here for me and across the entire journey is to always be day one. And Up again is a really great example of this, where like we need to move really quick. If we don't want to fall behind, we need to move really, really quick. So like if there's an opportunity there, take it, grab it by the balls, and move really quick. There's 3 other lessons I want to share really quickly before I wrap things up. Number 8 is software needs personality. Again, like Up, great example of this, and we try to adopt it within our own Storytail team, is that I think we've gone to a stage where, we had Clippy in Word, and that was an era. And then we moved to a stage where like we tried to streamline technology as much as possible. And we actually got to, I still think we are in a place where we've taken the humanity out of it. So if we can figure out how we put the humanity into it and add this experience and add this personality back to it, it's actually going to create a much more enjoyable feeling for our users and for our customers. Second last lesson I want to share is to build teams of great people. I'm sure you all know this, but it's absolutely true. There's this great quote by Jim Rohn, which is, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think that's absolutely true. So if you can surround yourself by these really great people and realize that, you can be in the front, you can have the loudest voice, but ultimately like none of that matters unless you've got the right people around you. And then lastly is to never stop being a child. Like I think if we can all sort of like embrace our inner child and that creativity, then we can always kind of push the boundaries to what's possible. And yeah, that's me. That was my quick little spiel. If you want to follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, my socials are up there. And if you want to come for a chat, more than happy to chat and yeah, chat to you all. But yeah, thanks very much.